folder hit the marble floor of the Ashcroft dining room at 7 minutes past 8 on a Tuesday evening, and the sound of it, that flat, papery slap against cold stone, was the moment Margot Ashcroft understood that her marriage had not simply been failing. It had been a lie from the beginning. Margot Ellison Ashcroft, 37 years old, director of the Ellison Family Foundation, stood at the far end of the dining table with her hands folded in front of her and watched her husband pick up his wine glass as though nothing had happened, as though he had not just thrown 12 years of financial records across the room, as though the folder now lying open on the floor did not contain his signature on documents that had moved $4.3 million out of a charitable trust and into a holding company she had never heard of until 48 hours ago. Her husband, Callaway Ashcroft, 42 years old, Chief Operating Officer of Ashcroft Capital Group, took a long sip of his Bordeaux and set the glass back down with the measured care of a man who believed he was still in control of the room. "You went through my private files," he said. Margot did not answer immediately. She had learned, in the years since marrying Callaway, that the first person to speak after a silence like this one was the person who had already lost. She let the quiet stretch between them until she could feel it pressing against the walls. "I went through the Foundation's financial records," she said finally, "which I am legally entitled to do, which I am, in fact, obligated to do as its director." Callaway set his elbows on the table and steepled his fingers. He had a face made for confidence. Strong jaw, grey at the temples, eyes the color of expensive slate. She had once found that face beautiful. Standing here now, she mostly found it familiar, the way old furniture was familiar. Present, unremarkable. Hers through no particular choice she could still remember making. "You're getting yourself worked up over accounting transfers you don't have the context to understand," he said. "Then explain the context to me. I don't have time to walk you through every financial instrument we use to manage the Foundation's portfolio." "The Foundation's portfolio," Margot said, "doesn't include a shell company registered in Delaware under the name Brightwell Strategic Partners, which received transfers totaling $4.3 million across 14 separate transactions over the past 3 years. Something moved through Callaway's expression. Not guilt. Callaway Ashcroft did not do guilt. It was something closer to recalculation, the micro-adjustment of a man deciding which version of a story to tell next. "That account is a legitimate tax-advantaged vehicle," he said. "I know what it is," Margot said. "I hired someone to tell me what it is." The room went quiet again. Through the tall windows of the dining room, the November sky had gone the dark purple of a bruise. The house, their house, the Ashcroft house, 4 stories of brick and original millwork in Georgetown that Callaway's grandfather had bought in 1961, felt very large around her. It always had. She had never quite filled it. "You hired someone," Callaway repeated. "A forensic accountant and an attorney." He stood then, and she watched him do it, the practiced uncurling of a man who had spent decades using his physical presence to end conversations. He was tall. He had always used that. "Margot, don't." She held up one hand. "Not aggressive. Just clear. Don't say my name like that, like I'm a child who needs redirecting. I'm the one who has been running the Ellison Foundation for 9 years. I'm the one who raised the endowment from $11 million to $63 million. I know what a shell transfer looks like. I know what charitable fraud looks like. And I have 2 attorneys who are prepared to file a complaint with the IRS and the DCAG's office if I don't receive a full accounting of every dollar that left this foundation by the end of this week." Callaway was very still for a moment. Then he laughed. It was not a kind sound. "You realize what you're threatening," he said. "This isn't just about the foundation. This touches the entire capital group. You blow this up. You blow up everything. Your name is on half those filings. You want to explain to a federal investigator why the director of a charitable foundation didn't notice $4 million walking out the door. It was a good move. She had to give him that. She had spent 2 nights preparing for it. My attorneys have already prepared a documented timeline showing that I was deliberately excluded from those specific financial decisions," she said. "Every email you forwarded around me, every board meeting I was asked to miss, every time you signed documents that required my signature and used a workaround instead. It's all in there, Callaway. 18 months of documentation." She paused. "I've been building this since March." The color in his face changed. "You've been planning this since March." "I've been protecting myself since March," she said. "There's a difference." She thought he might throw something again. Instead, he picked up his phone from the table and walked out of the dining room without another word. She heard his footsteps cross the foyer. She heard the front door open and close. Margot stood alone at the end of the table for a long moment. Then she bent, picked up the folder from the floor, set it on the table, and walked to the kitchen to make herself a cup of tea. Her hands were completely steady. She had not expected that. The next 48 hours moved in a way that felt both very slow and very fast, the way serious things always did. Margot stayed in the house. Calloway did not come back. She did not call him. He did not call her. On Wednesday morning, she met with her lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Dunmore, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and spoke in complete paragraphs. They went through the documentation again. Patricia was satisfied, more than satisfied. Actually, she used the word unusually thorough twice, and Margot could tell by the way she said it that she did not give that particular compliment easily. On Wednesday afternoon, Margot got a call from Calloway's attorney, a man she had met at 3 different holiday parties and always disliked, who began the conversation by suggesting that both parties would benefit from a quieter resolution. Margot told him she would have Patricia's office follow up and ended the call. On Wednesday evening, her mother-in-law called. Margot stared at the phone for 2 full rings before she answered. Rosalind Ashcroft, 68 years old, was a woman who had spent 6 decades in Washington society and had accumulated, in that time, the particular kind of social power that comes from outlasting everyone who ever underestimated her. She was not warm. She had never pretended to be warm. What she was, instead, was consistent, and over 12 years of marriage to her son, that consistency had come to feel, if not like affection, then at least like a known quantity. "Margot," she said. "Rosalind, I've spoken with Calloway. I assumed you had." A pause. Margot heard the faint sound of ice in a glass. Rosalind took bourbon at 7 o'clock every evening. She had done this for as long as Margot had known her. "He says you're threatening to involve federal authorities." "I'm not threatening anything," Margot said. "I'm describing what my attorneys are prepared to do if we can't reach a satisfactory accounting, Margot." Rosalind's voice did not change in pitch or volume. That was how you knew with Rosalind when something mattered. Everything stayed level. Everything stayed controlled. "You don't want to do this. I'm not sure I agree with that. The foundation carries the Ellison name. Your father built that foundation. If this becomes a public matter, then people will know that the man I married was using my father's charitable foundation as a personal financial instrument," Margot said. "Yes, I'm aware of how that looks. I'm also aware of how it looks to a federal investigator when the director of a charitable trust filed her own complaint before anyone came looking for her." Silence. "You really did plan this," Rosalind said. "I've been the director of that foundation for 9 years, Margot said. "I didn't marry into it. My father left it to me. That was his decision, and I intend to honor it." Another pause, longer this time. "I want to meet with you," Rosalind said. "Not on the phone. In person, call my attorney's office," Margot said. "She'll arrange it." She ended the call and sat for a while in the quiet of the study that had been her father's, in the house that bore her husband's family name, and thought about the difference between those two things. Her father's foundation, her husband's family name, which one she had chosen, which one had been given to her. She already knew the answer. She had always known it. She just hadn't been ready to say it out loud until now. The meeting with Rosalind took place on Friday morning at a hotel restaurant in DuPont Circle that was known for its discretion and its very good coffee. Rosalind was already seated when Margot arrived. She was wearing grey. She was always wearing grey. Patricia Dunmore was with Margot. She had insisted on it, and Margot had not argued. Rosalind looked at Patricia with the measured expression of a woman who had learned to be careful about showing surprise. "I assumed this would be a private conversation," Rosalind said. "It is," Margot said. "Patricia is here as my counsel." Rosalind's gaze moved back to Margot. "You've changed. I've had a difficult week." "That's not what I mean." Coffee was poured. A server appeared, was dispatched with the polite efficiency that Rosalind had always executed better than anyone Margot had ever known, and then they were alone in a pocket of relative quiet in the middle of the morning rush. "I'm going to be direct with you," Rosalind said. "Please." "The family is prepared to offer a complete restoration of all transferred funds to the Ellison Foundation, a full accounting prepared by an independent auditor of the family's choosing, and a structured separation agreement that protects both your financial interests and Calloway's position at the Capital Group." She folded her hands on the table. "In exchange for a private resolution, no federal filing, no public record." Margot looked at her for a moment. "That's a significant offer," she said. "It's a fair one," Margot agreed. "There's one problem with it." Rosalind waited. "The Ashcroft Capital Group's most significant institutional investor," Margot said carefully, "is the Wyndham Ellison Trust, which is managed through the board of the Ellison Family Foundation." She paused. "Which means I sit on the board that controls whether the Capital Group retains that investment relationship." The expression on Rosalind's face did something very small, a fraction of a degree of rearrangement around the eyes. "That trust was established by my father in 1998, Margot continued. Its charter specifies that investment relationships must be renewed annually by a majority vote of the foundation board. The next renewal vote is in 6 weeks. She set her coffee cup down gently. I am the foundation board. Patricia, beside her, made a small note on the legal pad in front of her. Rosalind was very quiet. Calloway knew about the trust structure, she said finally. Yes, and you're saying, I'm saying I want a full accounting, Margot said. Not from an auditor of the family's choosing, from an independent firm agreed upon by both parties. I want complete transparency on every financial decision made in the foundation's name in the past 5 years. I want a legal separation structure that is equitable and enforceable, not just fast. She met Rosalind's eyes across the table, and I want the Capital Group to understand that I did not come to this meeting to be managed. I came to reach an agreement. Those are very different things. The restaurant moved around them. A child laughed somewhere near the entrance. A server cleared a table to their left. Rosalind looked at her for a long time. Your father would have liked how you did this, she said. It was the last thing Margot had expected her to say. She felt it land somewhere in her chest, that sentence, in a place she had not expected to feel anything. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Rosalind said. I'm not complimenting you. I'm telling you the truth. She picked up her coffee cup. I'll have our attorneys contact Patricia's office this afternoon. The agreement took 3 weeks to finalize. In those 3 weeks, Margot packed her personal belongings from the Georgetown house, moved into the apartment above the foundation offices that her father had kept as a workspace and that she had always privately preferred to the big house anyway, and began the process of not being married to Calloway Ashcroft. It was quieter than she had expected. It was not easy. It was not nothing. 12 years was not nothing. She was honest with herself about that, in the mornings especially, when the coffee was brewing and the apartment was still, and she was not yet armored for the day. There was grief in it. There was anger. There was occasionally a specific kind of loneliness that felt less like missing him and more like missing the version of herself who had believed the story she'd been told about who they were together. But mostly she worked. The Ellison Foundation's December board meeting was the first one she had chaired without Calloway's shadow in the room, and she ran it with a precision that surprised even Patricia, who had attended as legal observer. They approved a new grant cycle. They restructured the investment committee. They brought in 2 new board members, a public health researcher from Howard University and a former Treasury official named Hewson Bright, who asked the kind of questions that made everyone else think harder. Margot liked him immediately. He reminded her, in some oblique way, of her father, not his manner, which was quieter and more deliberate than her father's had been. It was something else, the quality of his attention, the fact that he listened before he spoke. After the meeting ended and the other board members filed out into the December evening, Hewson Bright remained behind to look at the framed photographs along the east wall of the foundation's conference room. Her father shaking hands with city councilmen, her father at groundbreakings, her father, young and serious and holding a shovel, at the construction site of the first community health clinic the foundation had funded in 1991. He looks like he meant it, Hewson said. Margot came to stand beside him and looked at the photograph. He did, she said. That's rarer than it sounds. I know. He looked at her sideways, with the particular attention of someone who is deciding whether to say the next thing. You meant it too, he said. In there tonight. Every proposal you brought to that table, you meant it. Margot looked at the photograph of her father for another moment. I've been trying to prove that to the wrong people for 12 years, she said. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out anyway. Hewson was quiet for a moment. That happens, he said, more than it should. They stood in the empty conference room for a moment longer. Outside, the city was doing what cities did at 7 o'clock in December, moving, lighting up, folding itself into the evening. I was told you'd be joining our investment committee, Margot said, if you'll have me. We're meeting in January. She glanced at him. You ask good questions. I had a good example, he said. Your father testified before the Senate Finance Committee in 2004. I was a junior staff. I took notes. Margot looked at him. You didn't say that in your board introduction. It felt like showing off. She almost smiled. She hadn't almost smiled in 3 weeks. It felt strange, not bad, exactly, just unfamiliar, like a muscle she had forgotten she had. January, she said. 8 o'clock. I'll be there, Hewson said. She did not tell anyone about the conversation. There was nothing to tell, and she was tired of people asking how she was doing in the particular way people asked when they expected her to still be broken. She was not broken. She was rebuilding. Those were different things. The agreement with the Ashcroft family was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in Patricia's office. $4.3 million fully restored to the foundation, a clean separation, a non-disclosure clause that Margot had her attorneys narrow specifically to exclude anything that might later be relevant to a regulatory inquiry, an exclusion that Calloway's attorney had pushed back on for 2 full days before the Ashcroft family had apparently decided it wasn't worth the alternative. Margot signed her name and dated it December 19th and drove home through streets that were very bright with Christmas lights. That night, she sat in her father's old chair by the window with a glass of wine and thought about the folder on the floor and the sound of it hitting the marble and how far away that already felt. Not because she had forgotten it, she didn't think she would forget it, but because the sequence of events that folder had set in motion, the attorneys, the documentation, the weeks of careful, deliberate movement, had taken her somewhere she hadn't expected to end up. Not back to where she started, somewhere she hadn't been before. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Her friend Nessa, who had been calling every few days since October to check on her and never once asked how she was doing in that particular way. Because Nessa had known her since they were both 23 and working for non-profits that couldn't afford to pay them properly, and she knew the difference between the question and the performance of the question. Margot answered. "Are you okay?" Nessa asked. No preamble. "I signed the agreement today, okay? Are you okay?" Margot looked out the window at the December sky. The city was very bright. Somewhere below, a taxi honked. Someone's dog barked twice and then stopped. It was, she realized as she said it, the most honest thing she had said in months. Nessa was quiet for a second. Then, "That's enough for tonight." "Yeah," Margot said. "It is." She did not say it to be dramatic. She said it because it was true and because she had learned, slowly the hard way, through 12 years of being in a room where the truth was never quite allowed to land, that true things, even small ones, were worth saying out loud. She held on to that. Outside, the city kept moving. The lights stayed on. She was not who she had been before. She was not yet who she was going to, but she was, at last, entirely herself. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like enough to begin again.